Welcome back to the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. Today we have an exciting podcast. We think two very interesting topics. 750 joins Provi, merges with Provi, something happens there. And we zoom into the Star Trek future for wine. Can we print wine at home? This could be very scary, interesting. We're going to find out from our insiders. So we have Laurie from Oushinery.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
Nick from Wine Owners.
Hello.
Seth from Troly.
Good morning, everyone.
And Jonathan from Bottlebooks.
Good evening from Munich.
Okay, first up, on This Week in Startups, David Friedberg was on. This Week in Startups is a podcast host by Jason Calacanasis, and they're both a part of this big podcast called the All In Podcast, and they were talking about David's next project, or one of the projects he's working on called Cana. Seb, give us a rundown. What is this about?
Well, essentially, the backdrop of the project is literally where they started breaking down. They started with wine, actually. They started breaking down the wine liquid, the product, into its molecular structure. And they quickly realized that it seems to be very possible to create wine out of water. So water, and then you're adding 1% worth of the molecules which create the taste. And they started with wine, and they slowly realized that every drink really is 95, 99% water that's being bottled and transported at really high cost, when in reality, you could have a machine at home, much like a soda stream or a 3D printer. You could have a machine at home hooked up to your water, and then have a few canisters of a few molecular compounds and recreate not only wine, but just about any drinks based on water plus its molecular breakdown. So effectively, they're saying you have water, you have a machine, you have a bunch of predefined recipes, you can print or you can generate any drinks that you want at home, on demand, and at restaurants and everywhere else.
Did you, are you going to get a printer for home?
I mean, honestly, like it is very curious, and it's, like you can have two approaches, right? Like when you look at the more like scientific approach, like it makes like a ton of sense, when you like break it down, but it's also like, oh my goodness, like, like what happens, like the storytelling, like can you buy like special recipes so that the fancy Saint-Emilion that is, like who knows, like it's just kind of like very, very strange that way. I'm also personally curious, and I didn't hear in all the articles I read about Cana, like what about like the nutritional value? Not necessarily talking about nutritional value of wine, but they're saying you can print orange juice, like fruit juice and all of that. So this, didn't seem to have a lot of, I don't know about that part, like the nutritional value or calorie content for that matter. Like a lot of the articles are mostly talking about the flavor part. And then I was just thinking like, okay, so really like the sky is a limit in terms of like what you can drink and print, and like, what does that mean for alcohol consumption? Like, because you can choose your percentage of alcohol and then you have it unlimited at home. Like you don't even need to order on your phone your wine delivered at your door. Like it's just, obviously like it's a lot of questions. I think just for the exercise of it, the fact of changing we've been discussing a lot in that podcast about switching to cans, like better for the environment and everything. And that's really one of the strong value or mission, the way to present it, at least to the general public right now, is how to avoid like waste, right? Like waste in the production of the liquid, waste in the transport of that liquid, and so on. So that's just like very interesting. And I thought exactly of like the soda stream, just like Seb mentioned, even though they never mention it. And the idea of like printing is, I think they need a better name, like generate or like it's a bit, yeah, strange.
But Nick, this is a big question. I mean, should we be shipping all this water around the world? Even if it's not in a printer, is there a way to do that better?
Well, I thought it was pretty interesting. I hear Rudy Kanarian is out of prison now, and I think he might be one of the first guys to buy this machine. And I'd recommend that the producers of the machine, when composing the different drinks, include things like 1934 Claude La Roche by Laurent Ponceau, although they probably should check first whether it was a vintage in which that wine was actually produced. And I think he may be opening a website for engaging with sommeliers who can provide him with empty bottles of all of the great estates from all of the great vintages as the Michelin-starred restaurants get through them, so that he can put the liquid into these bottles from his machine, which obviously is great for the environment because it's recycling glass. So overall, as you can tell, I was incredibly impressed by the idea.
I'm curious, so for me as well, like how it commoditize wine, like, like you just suddenly, like, how do you differentiate like an excellent vintage that can be recreated just as well as, yeah, I don't want to give a name.
Yeah.
Technically it's the same compound, right? And like you need the same cartridge to print this like a different result. And just so does that mean we're all going to be super good at drinking only super good wine? Because why would you not?
Right, exactly.
Like it's just like, or like almost like I don't want to say existential question, but like it redefines. And obviously my background is I'm a packaging designer by trade, and and there are studies that show that a lot of the experience of wine and the appreciation is also like the socialness of like the bottle, like how it looks, the story you tell, and you kind of really bypass all of that. So, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I go to McDonald's, which I can't remember the last time I did that, but like, when you pop over and you just get your Coke, in your glass, like falling down, it's not exciting. Like, like it's just like, and if I have my wine, even if it's like the Chateau Cheval Blanc, like, I don't know, like really, maybe the novelty could wear fast. I'm on a consumer experience. Seb, I saw you noting.
And look, I think it's really the main point here, right? If we're looking at the wine market globally, include beers and spirits and other drinks, right? There's a lot of products which, like, you want a Coke, like the Coke is always going to taste exactly the same thing. Fair enough. If I was Coke, I would be scared shitless, right? Because this machine will effectively be able to recreate a Coke exactly like it tastes out of a can. It will force any markets, any beverage that has a level of subjectivity into it, right? It will force them to lean extensively on their story and their experience. When you go and visit, when you talk about it, when you discover that wine, the challenge, if you think about your Cheval Blanc, the challenge is that you sitting at home having an outstandingly good glass of wine with a bunch of your friends is just as valid of an experience as you traveling thousands of miles and visiting a bunch of wineries and kind of taking a few memories out of there. So I don't think...
I'd be super interested in terms of, how these essential compounds are, if you like, packaged through this printer, and how those compounds may vary as a consequence of age, for example. Are they the same compounds, or do they change their molecular structure over age? And is that something that can be reproduced or not?
Yeah.
What are the differences between alcohol that's poured into a glass, as you might, your methylated spirits, versus alcohol that is a byproduct alcoholic fermentation. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, if you have a recipe, that's basically what they're calling it. If you have a recipe for a bottle of wine that has been broken down into a recipe that's 10 years old, or if the wine is 10 years old and they make a recipe out of it, the aim is to reproduce the same wine at that time, at 10 years old. I think one of the greatest challenge that they haven't quite figured out, and it's probably going to be a saving grace to a bunch of drinks manufacturers, is the fact that they're basically saying there's about 500 molecular compounds, and the machine will not be able to have the 500 of them. Mm-hmm. So while they can make the drink to taste subjectively taste the same thing, we don't know that the other additional compounds don't have a slightly different experience and mouthfeel, and it might not be exactly, while taste might be the same, the actual drink might not be exactly the same, because they're not going to be able to package those 500 molecular compounds.
Jonathan, we haven't heard from
shake
you.
The industry, right?
Jonathan, I think you studied chemical engineering, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. So this is right up my alley. I mean, I think that if the technology does what it can, or what it says, then I think all of us will have one of these either at our home or have access to one somewhere else. Because I think, like you were saying, Seb, there's probably going to be a difference between an 80 ingredient printer and a 500 ingredient printer, and you might be able to get even a budget 20 ingredient printer for your home.
That's going to do 90%.
Like the little Nespresso machine. But if you want to have like a proper espresso, you need a bigger, Italian get up. I think it has the potential to eliminate a lot of the frustrating parts about the wine business. So take, for example, WSET. I think that this would be a godsend to the WSET. If you go to the courses and you're tasting the wine, in the first part of the tasting process, it is zero about the story. Mm-hmm. There's nothing about the story. It's actively discouraged to know who made that wine. It's all about your experience of that wine. And one of the most difficult things for the WSET schools are to get the wines in the samples, in the sizes, on the schedule that they needed. And if they were able to basically design the curriculum and have it prepared, they're not going to have to worry about the wines going old or whatever. They're there to train your taste buds. And if they can do it, I think that's very, very fascinating. Or like, think of restaurants or wine bars popping up where it's like on demand, design your own wine. And, how much of the wine is commercial wine? Yeah. I think that's the part where you have real potential for something like this, because not everybody knows what fine wines taste like, and they are happy drinking that, and also just playing around, because if you're a consumer, some of my early stories going to wine events in Germany was that you go to a producer. German producers typically have 16 wines on their table because they need to make the whole palette. That's just the way you if you buy wine historically in Germany, you would buy all your wines, the entire range, from only one winemaker. And so that's why they have 16 wines. But consumer goes up to the table. The winery asks you, what do you like to drink? The consumer looks a little bit flustered. And so instead of the way of getting out of this potentially embarrassing situation is the winemaker says, well, would you just like to taste your way through my wines? Fantastic. 16 wines later, you're plastered after the first table. But if you were able to taste our own and sort of say, how do I like higher alcohol wines, lower alcohol wines, fruity or less fruity, tannins or whatever, and you could dial this in, you could then go to a wine event and be more educated about where you were headed. And I think before we even get into like the ramifications of who this could potentially hurt, I think there's a lot of other things outside the environmental aspects of it that if it works and it works well, it could really be an interesting game changer for some of these
they were basically saying that one of the great, they're really positioning the business as more of a recipe marketplace. So they want Coke to be able to publish their own recipe. They want any winemaker to be able to publish their own recipe and make the product then available worldwide instantly. So if that promise does deliver, where the drink is exactly the same thing or 99% as close as a drink, it could be an absolute game changer for a lot of small winemakers with a lot of ideas that they want to try a bit more of this, a bit more of that. Once they have a drink that they like, the wine brands could pop out of everywhere and instantly being distributed worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, think of a winemaker that makes 2,000 cases.
Yeah.
How do you let somebody sample your wine? Yeah. If you can have one of your wines analyzed and have a close copy, it's not going to be the same thing. Then you suddenly can open a tasting room, which you wouldn't have been able to do before with 2,000 cases. I mean, it's almost like going back, almost a decade, the déjà vu with 3D printing. This is, it ended up not being something that all of us have at our home. That's what they also thought at the time. But you do have lots of commercial uses for 3D printing. So.
Oh, yeah, correct. And look, I think just for the benefit of everyone listening, it's probably worth mentioning that Cana suggested that they are currently working on the machine and they want to have it. They want to have the first prototype available next year, so not 2022, 2023. And that's, everything being smooth and easy. So it's quite likely that it's not going to be widely available, at least for another year or two, and there's going to be multiple versions. So I don't think it's going to change the industry today.
No.
But it's the kind of things coming out of Silicon Valley, or are they even in Silicon Valley? I'm not sure. That's likely to have an overall pretty significant impact on the industry, even if it means that everything which is mass produced, I think the what do you call them, the Constellations of the world and the EJ Gallos of the world are far more threatened than the Cheval Blanc and the Saint-Emilions, right? Not as much.
And then, before it also hits a home, it's just how does it get taxed, right? You just how do you go for, and don't get me wrong, this is not my passion, but we know one of the main issue as well, especially in North America, is all this 3-tier system, right? You just can't, and now you just with the same, canister. I'm I'm putting orange juice this morning and I'm putting my glass of rosé tonight, and then I'm putting my port a bit later. This won't be able to get the home until, the, countries figure how to still make money out of this and just regulation. And then how do you make sure a 5 years old or 10 years old doesn't print his own booze? And it's just this is not a problem I want to solve, but I would imagine this, it can't go at any scale until these issues, especially after the debacle that was devices Juuls and everything, right? The whole vaping issue, no, it's not for the kids. Turns out all the kids are doing it. You can't be naive, oh no, this can print anything, but the kids will only print orange juice and milk. I'm yeah, sure. So there's also all these things that needs to be solved. But on a conceptual level, I think it's just fascinating. I'm genuinely very curious. And I don't think people are necessarily that far away from being against it too, right? I think it's actually fairly easy to comprehend. I don't know the quality of it, but exactly the Nespresso machine, hey, you can get this when it started, very fancy coffee from around the world, bring it to your home and push that button and here it goes. Is it the best coffee? Of course not. But did you deliver better result than what was around? Yes. So it's just a spot like this. Just genuinely science fiction. I'm all for it. Lots of problems to solve though. And they're hiring a ton. I was just looking, I think they're aware of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the main point. They're basically coming out of stealth. So they're now basically saying, we exist, this is what we do. And the main point was exactly that. They just want to hire and hire and hire. Yeah. Very interesting topic.
Well, there's another company that has been hiring a lot over the last year, and they're part of a merger We don't know all the details of the merger, but it seems, because they're both private companies, but it seems that Provi and 750 have come together. Now, we've talked a lot about 750 on this podcast. 750 enables the sort of the 3-tier supply chain in the US to work, and enables orders to go through. Provi, we haven't even touched. We missed the fact that they raised over 100 million last year, and they with a valuation of about 750 million. So huge numbers. Provi, according to Provi, is the fastest growing B2B e-commerce marketplace for the beverage alcohol industry. And Provi's digital marketplace grants retailers a robust contactless system to place all of their orders 24/7. There is, in 2021, Provi announced that 10% of licensed retailers in the US are now utilizing its e-commerce marketplace. Fascinating, very US centered, but fascinating. And Uber took over Drizzly, thank you, last year, and now this. Jonathan, let's start with you. What was your first impressions upon hearing this?
Yeah, and first off, I hadn't heard about Provi, but apparently they've been around since 2016. They had tremendous growth during the pandemic, when I think they must have had just an amazing marketing campaign as like the safe way to order beverages that just took off during COVID. And I think their press release is very accurate from everything that we know about 750 and Provi. They sound like two very complementary businesses. So I think that has a very interesting play for the US. I think it's I'm wondering what the major distributors are thinking about that right now, because I think that's what we had also kind of understood, was that there started to been a bit of pushback against 750 the past couple of years, because the distributors were seeing that their power that they were trying to achieve through consolidation was starting to be lost to technology platforms like 750, and they started to duplicate 750 in-house. So I think that now what they're doing is adding, yet another tier, and that's something that you have some practical limitations of what's legally possible for distributors in the US. So I think this can be a very, very smart play to push back, have the pendulum push back the other way now in the US.
And mute again.
Sorry. Nick, do you have any insight into this? Had you heard anything about this, or?
I hadn't heard about Provi. I mean, we have something over here called F&B Shop, which is a sort of an old-fashioned equivalent in terms of a marketplace for the on-trade, so restaurants, bars, and whatever else, small shops to source through. I think it's really exciting, actually. I think that, it's a reflection of how connectivity is going to bring this industry into the modern era. I was having a quick look at both websites in response to this news, and there was a quote from one of the 750 customers, which was as follows: in a fragmented and mildly chaotic industry that seems to think it's still 1985, these few organizational tools are golden to us. I think that there is so much truth in that. I think it is changing so fast as a result of the last couple of years and what we've been through. I think if you look ahead to something like 2010, it will not be a chaotic business anymore. It will be a really efficient, highly interconnected business, in my view. Yes, clearly there are some particular structural issues within the US around three-tier distribution, which clearly these large platforms are aiming to or in the process of solving. And I suspect they won't be the only things. They won't be the only two entities that will connect up to one another. I mean, you know, the platform that owns the relationships with importers is going to be the platform that is going to be looking for other ecosystems that it can connect up to in order to broaden its distribution and find its way into different pools of different addressable markets. So I think it's you know, it's happening. It's happening over here outside of the US. It's happening in respect to the connectivity that is taking place between retailers. We're facilitating that in terms of, you know, systematically putting in place ways of improving behaviors that are already part of the wine business, but which are hand-cranked and, you know, incredibly spotty. So, you know, basically to me, this is one thing, and principally, you know, a major thing, which is the industry is connecting and it will continue to connect itself up, and it will drive enormous efficiency and choice.
Mm-hmm.
Laurie, is this sorry, go
sorry, and that's the exciting part, right? Like, I think that's what I agree with you, Nick. Like, it's just, yeah, like it's, you know, like, of course, consolidation means like bigger and bigger companies, but it's also like streamlining and efficiencies. Like, it's just the frustration of the industry is taken away. Now, the catch, of course, is if this doesn't go well, then the frustration just even ramp up like further. So hopefully, like, they will, like, you know, like figure it out and then makes it like easier that way. What I was fascinated a bit, like all the panelists here, is just how Provi was under the radar. Like, they're not old. Check, like, they went all the way to Series C. And, you know, we were not amazed, but like noticing a couple of months ago when Sevenfifty raised a round B at like about 34 million. I'm just like playing my memory here. And Provi just raised 120, I think, in September. So it's just like, whoa, 4 times. Like, you know, like, it's just like peanuts. You know, so it's just kind of like fascinating, as even though I like to think, like, you know, all the people here, like, we're following pretty close, you know, what's happening in our world, and yet we can be taken by surprise like this, which is, I don't know, part of me is excited about it. Like, what else do we don't know about?
And look, I think there's a lot of communications coming out of the US and the US sort of startup ecosystem. And a lot of times, all of these news, everything we hear is something happening in the US. And I'm curious to see what businesses are we missing, what opportunities are there in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Which really, okay, I understand that the US is one big cohesive, quote, cohesive market. But at the same time, most wine in the world is not consumed in the US.
Yeah.
And so there has to be an enormous number of businesses and opportunities outside of the US that, you know, we've never really spoken about or never even seen, really.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what's interesting, I mean, always in the startup world about the US is how aggressive, how much money is raised, you know, the speed at which an American startup can move is doesn't mean they'll be more successful, but it is definitely attention grabbing.
Something.
I mean, it's also the founder from Provi, just so that we're all aware, the founder from Provi was also working at Drizzly before starting Provi. So there's obviously an amount of, you know, Silicon Valley style connections there. A lot of people talk to each other, they all know each other. So for
totally.
sure.
Just to the, not that they need defensing or anything like that, like I was just checking. What is interesting is even though those are all US companies, none of them are actually technically Silicon Valley. Drizzly is Boston, Provi is Chicago, and Sevenfifty is New York. So obviously I'm not saying those are like minor little hubs, but they're not Palo Alto.
I mean, Palo Alto slash, you go for it?
Sorry, like the Cana, like the startup that we talked, like the printer, this is Silicon Valley. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The generally speaking, we see startups in the US out of the West Coast / Silicon Valley is a bit more deep tech. Chicago / Atlanta are quite big on the broad food and beverages and supply chain as well. And New York, East Coast is also very big on the banking and the financial system. So there seems to be sort of a broad, there's exceptions, but broadly, that's how the investment scene is.
The background of the founders of 750 is banking. Like they come from the banking world. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, yeah. Look, I think 750 and Provi, it does make sense. From my understanding, I mean, 750 has only been focusing on e-commerce in the last 2 years, right?
Really,
where they really expanded from content towards having an e-commerce offering. I don't know how much a Shopify of the world will be able to just come in and go, you know what, guys, we've already got 4 million drinks and beverages producers using our technology. Here's a data feed for all the restaurants, right? Now, if that was to happen, Shopify is already connected with a number of point of sales for restaurants, right? So from that perspective, how much is the Provi plus 750 alliance or merger, how much is that really adding value to the chain? Okay, there's a 3 tiers complexity in the US, but again, the US is only a small fraction of the global beverages industry.
That was episode 23 of the Wine Tech Insiders podcast. I'd like to thank our insiders again, Laurie from Oushinery, Nick from Wine Owners, Jonathan from Bottlebooks, and Seb from Troly.
Thank you, guys. See you later.
Thank
See you later.
Have a good one.